This week on The Right Side, a report on the impact of the Alberta carbon tax. Meanwhile, possible privacy violations by the BC NDP. The usual actors are talking about splitting up the Conservative Party, and will Trudeau's meddling with the National Energy Board alienate the West? This is The Right Side, Episode 11, recorded Saturday, April 8th, 2017. The Importance of Energy and Privacy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Right Side. Shane and Patrick here, as per usual. Welcome back this week.
Good to be back, as always.
I just need to take a bit of a deep breath. A bit of an allergy attack that caused us to get going a little bit later than normal this week, but...
That's okay. When looking at the news, it's always important to take a deep breath.
Yeah, and that's what we intend to do here with The Right Side. This week, we're going to deliver you guys the right news rundown and the firing line segment as usual, but if you guys are just joining us for the first time, The Right Side is a podcast that comes out of BC and Alberta and Canada that endeavors to cut through the bias and sensationalism in the mainstream media and talk about things that aren't being talked about enough, or put out some fires on things that are being talked about a little bit too much for all the wrong reasons. And
to just take an objective, critical look at the news and what they're actually trying to tell us.
Yeah, and some things that don't actually get talked about. Like you hear things are going to come into effect one way or the other, like, for example, a new policy initiative, or maybe something changed in the way the news reports a certain sector of the country. We talk about how that changes, but then we don't go back for a look at it, and that's something that needs to happen every now and then, and that's what we're going to actually start off with this week in the Alberta segment, and that's a news item from the the Edmonton Sun, entitled "Rachel Notley's Green Tax Attacks the Week." You quite enjoyed this headline, didn't you?
Yeah, tax attacks. It's just perfect poetry.
Yeah, I'm not a poet. But anyways, quoting from the article here, on our most recent bill, the NDP's provincial sales tax, masquerading as a green tax, was equal to 34.7% of the cost of the natural gas we consumed. Gas last month was on average a price of $2.90 a gigajoule, and the NDP's tax on that is $1.01 a gigajoule. So as you can do the math there, that's roughly around 33% worth of carbon tax on natural gas, for one thing. And the article goes on to say that if this kind of tax was applied to similar products, for example, a $4.49 box of cereal would cost you $6.05. Meanwhile, monthly rent of $11.50 would jump to $15.50, and your next compact car, the fuel-efficient subcompact that the NDP want you to buy, let's call it a Rachel Mobile, the columnist says, would jump from $22,000 to $29,600. And this is before the carbon tax goes up 50% next year, bringing it to over $1.50 a gigajoule on natural gas. And of course, this is just the beginning, because it goes up on all other sorts of fuel as well, which of course is going to impact things such as your groceries, because how does food get to the grocery store?
Usually by trucks.
Exactly. So, it's nice to see in this article that there is a bit of an accounting going on here of what the carbon tax is looking like, and in particular, we haven't really heard this from any of the other media sources in the province or in the country. So this is something I think that people need to be aware of, especially in jurisdictions that don't have a carbon tax yet, like Saskatchewan. And you guys have one in BC already, but you guys have become accustomed to it over the years.
Yeah, I think we've gotten kind of used to it, to be honest, since it was put in probably about 4 years ago. And I think the political climate in BC is definitely a lot different than Alberta. And there doesn't seem to be any plans to repeal it, because it was brought in by the BC Liberals, and the NDP actually supported that initiative. So for people who don't support it, they're kind of SOL.
And, that brings up another very interesting point, that it was 100 years ago this year, in the depths of World War I, that the income tax was brought in, which was, of course, deemed to also be a temporary measure in Canada. But look where we are today. It's the number one source of revenue for the government of Canada. But that's a topic for another show. I just love saying that. And maybe we will note some of these down and talk about these one day. But,
yes.
This is equivalent and, perhaps worse than the HST in some provinces, because also GST is applied on the carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
So
taxes on taxes.
That's right. And, it's only 5%, but still, that adds up. And, as much as people want to champion a carbon tax as a method of reducing emissions, I think there are better ways to go about this. And there's also got to be some discussion about where are these revenues coming from the carbon tax? Are they just going into general government coffers? That's going to, help a little bit in reducing our deficit here? Or are they actually going to be targeted towards the Ministry of Environment that can put them towards programs and services and initiatives to, green the economy, so to speak? That's something that we're really not seeing, and the government hasn't offered up yet. And even if they do offer it up, it seems like it's inflated talking points over concrete evidence on that matter. So there definitely needs to be more work done on this file, I think. And that's why we're talking about that this week, is because the Edmonton Sun so far is really the only ones outside of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to talk about the fact that this carbon tax is so expansive and it hits everything in the economy. So think about this next time you're going for groceries, or you're getting gas, or you're even just heating your house, that you're paying this carbon tax. And even though it's supposed to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in our economy, we have no way of knowing really for certain that the revenues coming from the tax are being put towards that kind of initiative. So, food for thought.
I think that's something that's important to note, is that even if it is a carbon tax, which is supposed to help the environment, a tax first and foremost is a way to transfer money from the citizenry to the government.
Right.
That's exactly what it is, and that's what it's doing.
Yeah.
So, and whether they actually do put it towards the environment afterwards is a matter of debate.
Yeah,
and something that we won't really actually know.
Yeah, and for me, that's why I enjoy the idea of a reverse carbon tax, which means you essentially give businesses the ability to get a tax credit by proving that they're reducing their emissions, which takes the burden completely off of the consumers, everyone out there listening to this podcast. So, and it helps business grow at the end of the day.
And it also allows them to make choices rather than forcing them into something. And it also means that different industries that use different energy input aren't taxed unfairly because of the difference in the economy.
Right, exactly. And we're venturing more into economic theory here, which I don't know if the NDP government does that when they put together their budgets, but once again, that's a topic for another show.
Indeed.
Economic theory with Shane and Patrick on the right side.
That would be probably the most scintillating podcast ever, right?
Oh, yeah. I could talk about that for hours, and I know you could too.
I bet you could. In fact, I don't think I would be able to talk for it for hours because you just, blah, blah, blah. But I think it would be very interesting and enlightening regardless. Speaking of interesting and enlightening, I think we'll move on to BC now with a headline that jumped out at me the other day, and that was "Privacy Complaint by Liberals Alleges NDP Shares Supporter List Without Consent." So, the BC Liberal Party has filed a complaint with the province's Privacy Commissioner alleging that the NDP has breached protection laws by sharing its supporter list with politically friendly groups. So the request for the investigation states that we, them being the BC Liberals, have obtained documentation concerning the activities of the BC NDP, Strategic Communications, the municipal political parties Vision Vancouver, Coalition of Progressive Electors, and the Surrey Civic Coalition, and the NDP officials in Saanich, BC, which shows serious and ongoing breaches of the Personal Information Protection Act. So basically, the local parties mentioned in the Liberals' letter represent the center-left on the political spectrum. Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, who a lot of people probably know of, is actually a former New Democrat member of the legislature who was in the legislature from 2005 until he resigned in 2008 to run for mayor. So he ran under the Vision banner in the last municipal election. And the complaint to the Privacy Commissioner includes documents of 3 agreements dated October 5th, 2005 between the NDP and Vision Vancouver, COPE, and the Surrey Civic Coalition. The letter also says the breaches are as recent as November 2014, when the list was used during municipal elections in Saanich, BC, which is actually my local municipal riding. The letter states these agreements set out a secret arrangement whereby the BC NDP would share lists regarding its supporters with these politically friendly municipal parties to help them identify supporters and assist them to elect their candidates in municipal elections.
So basically, just to summarize this a bit for those who might not be familiar with this kind of activity, the NDP has a supporter list, and when you go to the NDP website and you sign up as a supporter of that party, what this is saying is that they're sharing those lists, the people who say, I like the NDP, they're sharing it with other like-minded groups.
Yeah, exactly. And for those who don't know about the PIPA, the Personal Information Protection Act, basically describes how the private sector organizations handle the personal information of their employees and the public. And it also includes rules about collecting and using and disclosing this personal information that they do collect, because all political parties do collect information on you when you sign up. So it basically balances the 2 principles of the individual's right to protect their information and the organization's need to collect or use and disclose this personal information. So basically, the Liberals allege that the provincial NDP shared their member list with parties that support the NDP values and did so without those members' consent, which of course is the violation of that act. And the reason basically for doing so would be to contact those members about candidates, target them for advertising, and try and help get their own candidates elected. And I think it's really notable because the NDP, they're widely accepted to have strong ties to municipal politics. And in Vancouver and Victoria, especially, center-left parties and candidates, they regularly dominate the municipal elections. And basically, if the Liberal allegations are correct, it would really just be another way that the BC NDP are trying to skirt around the law in order to gain political advantage.
Yeah. And, I give them credit for doing this, and it's not in a very positive way, of course, because, it could very well be illegal, correct?
Exactly, and it all depends on if the allegation's true or not. It could just be the Liberals trying to, shift something towards the NDP as a scandal. But then again, it may very well be true, and I think it's important that the commissioner will.
And this is something that doesn't really happen on the conservative side. There's very little organization outside of the conservative parties in Canada, I find, of groups that support the party and will actually go out and lobby for them outside of an election. It's very rare to find that, and it's much easier to find that in the NDP and the Liberal parties, for example. So just a bit of contrast there.
And something to note is that the provincial NDP parties are all affiliated with the federal NDP party.
That's right.
In fact, if you become a member of one, you're automatically a member of the provincial.
Oh, that's caused quite some tension here with Rachel Notley going to bat for pipelines and the federal NDP not liking that.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's getting off track.
Yeah. But yeah, it's basically something that will have to be looked at. It's not something I've really seen very much in even local news or BC news, so I'm sure it's not being talked about federally.
And I mean, of course, it's you got to pay attention first and foremost to people's privacy. And if privacy of people signing up for a website isn't being honored, that's a huge problem. And, even websites out there that, just set up, say, internet bulletin board system or even a comment system have to have a privacy policy saying that we're not going to use or sell your information to anyone else.
Exactly.
So it needs to be looked at regardless. And it comes down to an individual at the end of the day. And that's the most important thing, someone's privacy on this regard.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else on that story?
Think I'm good?
All right. So last Sunday, that's when, of course, all the political talk shows air in Canada, including The Right Side. We, of course, come to you guys on iTunes, but there's one on Global called The West Block, and they had an individual on the West Block named Scott Gilmore, and his discussion he was having with the host of the West Block was, is it time for a Conservative Party split? And some of the things that he said are that it's time for the Conservative Party to confront its identity crisis. I hate my party. It's time to build a new one that genuinely believes in liberty, equality, and facts over ideology. Scott Gilmore has also started off a listening session with this after apparently hearing people agree with him on this. He's calling it the new Conservative Dinners. That's going to take place in May as the Conservatives are getting ready to choose their next leader. The intention is to have a conversation about, does the party reflect our values? And if it doesn't, what do we do to change that? And he says his own discomfort began in the last election campaign with the barbaric cultural practices tip line. And then he was asked, finally, why not just vote Liberal instead of breaking the Conservatives into far-right and more moderate fractions? And he says, because I don't believe in big government, I believe in fiscal conservatism, I don't believe in identity politics, and I believe we need a strong defense. And he feels he shouldn't have to hold his nose and vote for Trudeau on that. Now, there's a very interesting thing. This came from an article that was first published in Maclean's website. And at the tail end of the article, it says, as the normal disclaimer that you would put in one of these articles, Scott Gilmore is a member of the Conservative Party and married to a Liberal cabinet member. Now, that wasn't mentioned at all on the West Block or in Global News' article on this matter. So there's a little bit of a bias in there that hasn't been discussed at all. So I think that's something, first and foremost, that we're looking at here on the right side, because I mean that's what we say, we want to cut bias out, but this was not even mentioned at all on the West Block or on Global's story. So that's issue number one. And issue number two, I think something that people should genuinely take note of if they're concerned about this kind of thing, is that this is the time to shape the party going forward, because there's a leadership election with 14 candidates. That's a lot. And I think anyone who wants to could find someone in there that they ultimately agree with, whether it's Maxime Bernier for the free market approach, or Andrew Scheer, who looks a lot like Stephen Harper used to look, or Kelly Leach, if you prefer that kind of campaign and focus on strong borders and immigration security, or even Michael Chong if you wanted a more moderate stance. So I don't know what the whole point of this story is and why it's being furthered, first by Maclean's and then Global. Obviously, there is a right to have this kind of discussion, but at the end of the day, I don't really think it helps anything, because now is the perfect time to shape that party. And I mean, if he feels truly that Michael Chong is the only one that has the ability to win against Trudeau, he should be, in my view, supporting Michael Chong in the upcoming election. Because I think we can all agree that Michael Chong is the most moderate and most liberal-looking of the members of the Conservative Party running for election right now.
Yeah, it's hard to say if he's even a red Tory. I'd probably more describe him as a blue liberal. But anyways, I think the bigger issue here is that the West Block, it airs on Sunday, but if it only aired just a day later, they could have heard to the Right Side episode 10, which aired last week, and they could have heard us talking about the dangers of vote splitting and how this is really a bad thing for parties in our first past the post system, and how that if the Conservatives do split, they're basically not going to get elected ever again. And it's important to note that this guy is married to a Liberal cabinet member, but is a member of the Conservative Party. Should raise eyebrows in a lot of people. And the fact that it wasn't discussed in a lot of the articles surrounding the issue is very worrying.
Right. And the Maclean's article doesn't even mention Michael Chong.
Yeah, I mean, it's very disingenuous reporting, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, granted, the Maclean's article is an op-ed piece, so he can write what he wants in there, and he doesn't need to necessarily mention Michael Chong. And for the benefit of the doubt, the Global interview did mention Michael Chong, and he feels that that's the only one who can beat Trudeau in 2019. That's the furthest extent that it went. It didn't go deeper into that. And, I could honestly see having, a fiscally conservative libertarian party, a nationalist conservative party, and, multiple small parties like that if we had proportional representation in coalition governments. But we don't here. And that's why we need to coalesce around the parties that exist. And that was the effort that was led in 2003 by lots of people to bring together the Progressive Conservatives and the Canadian Alliance. And it broke the Liberal hold on government that was in there for 13 years. So something was done right. And, I think also with this that campaigns can look a lot more loud and energetic than the actual leaders will be once they get out to the general election, right? Because they have to cater to the base in these votes. Whereas in the general election, you have to cater to everyone.
Exactly.
So I think the Conservative Party will come back to where they were in the center, or the center-right, so to speak. But, he does bring up those points, and I flip back again to the fact that there's 14 candidates in the race, and I can think of at least 3 of them who are on the red Tory or maybe even closer to center-right side than the other candidates. So there's definitely a choice for people out there who want to vote for that. And given the fact there's 14 of them and it's a ranked ballot, we have no idea how this is going to shape up at the end of May.
Yeah, I mean, there's the polls vary wildly. It's really hard to tell if they're accurate or not, and it's hard to tell who's going to vote for who because there's just so many choices out there. And with the ranked ballot, anything can happen at this point.
I haven't even decided yet for my numbers 2, 3, and 4.
I don't think either of us truly have. I don't think we will right up until the actual election itself.
Yeah. Anyways, so that came out of Global News and Maclean's magazine. So once again, it pays to do a little bit of research on who's writing and who's talking about the various facts going on here at the end of the day. All right, what do you got for firing line this week?
So, the firing line this week is a very kind of convoluted issue that came up in the Financial Post. The headline is, "Why Trudeau's promised NEB revamp is yet another pain for no gain exercise." So basically, Justin Trudeau wants to modernize the National Energy Board, and proposals include transferring powers from the NEB to the federal government and moving the National Energy Board headquarters from Calgary to Ottawa. So basically, for those not in the know, the NEB is an independent regulatory agency created by the Canadian government back in 1959 to oversee international and interprovincial aspects of the oil, gas, and electric utility industries. So it mainly regulates the construction and operation of pipelines that are connected between multiple provinces or international pipelines that go down to the United States. So the headquarters of the NEB has been in Calgary since 1992, and it was moved there from Ottawa by former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney to help oversee the growing energy industry in Alberta. So the described power grab style move would certainly make investors uneasy and reduce independent oversight on the federal government's role in the energy industry.
It feels like another kick when the energy industry is already suffering.
Yeah, and what honestly is the energy industry have anything to do with Ottawa, except for the fact that that's where the federal government is?
Yeah.
No. So Imperial Oil Limited, which is one of the biggest investors in the Alberta's energy industry, released a statement on the proposed changes, and they said it is Imperial's view that the NEB and its staff should be geographically located where it makes the most sense based on workload and the practicalities of hearings and the day-to-day logistics of regulatory oversight. We disagree that having the NEB located in Calgary taints the NEB's objectivity. Rather, having the board's head office in Calgary, away from Ottawa, where it was moved in 1992, physically puts the board and its staff at arm's length from the policymakers and closer to the operators they oversee.
This is the key point of this right here. It's that the federal government wants to extend its reach into these regulatory boards. And I think if Stephen Harper tried to do something like this, or the former government tried to do something like this, that was seen in the opposite of giving the NEB more power and less oversight, I think we'd be hearing crying foul over it.
Mm-hmm. So basically, Imperial also mentioned that the move to Calgary put a great cost on the industry, but is ultimately a good idea. But the move back to Ottawa would be less than useless, because it would be forcing the industry to pay levies through the cost recovery program a second time for basically no reason. Now, the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, which represents Canada's 11 major pipeline companies, argues that the NEB needs to be based in Calgary because it's the center of Canada's pipeline business. They said, quote, the NEB is located in Calgary because there are literally thousands of transactions and obligations at every stage of the life cycle of a pipeline that requires daily interaction between experts at the NEB and technical experts at the pipeline companies. There's no evidence to suggest that the NEB shows bias in favor of the industry that it regulates, nor in the decisions that it makes. Now, in its submission, the Canada West Foundation said that the charge that the NEB has been captured by the energy sector is serious and needs to be proven. It should be fixed by picking board members with more diverse backgrounds rather than just by moving its headquarters. There are better ways to enhance the NEB's legitimacy, the Canada West Foundation says, such as adopting a two-part review process, with the first part involving a political decision up front about whether a major project should go ahead and before proponents make up major investments. The second would be led by the NEB and deal with the more technical aspects. So basically, having promised to restore confidence in the NEB during his election campaign, Trudeau will find himself in a no-win situation. Basically, if he makes major changes to the regulator, which is actually widely admired internationally, he'll contribute to the regulatory uncertainty that is promoting the exodus of international companies from the oil patch, especially at a time when the Trump administration in the U.S. is lightening the regulatory load. And as concern about a national carbon price and the federal intrusion in the energy business feed Western alienation. If he doesn't, he would have made yet another promise that he won't be able to keep.
You know, I think the whole idea of making another promise that he's unable to keep is just par for the Liberal Party of Canada. That's point one. And if it leads to more Western alienation, we're ready. We've dealt with that before through the various previous Liberal governments in the past. So, I mean, it's up to his move. He should be very grateful that he has 4 seats from Alberta right now, especially 2 in Calgary. So this is something that needs to be thought through very carefully by this government, and it could have bad consequences for him come the next election, which we've kind of alluded to before. And once again, going back to our previous story, this is another reason why we need a united Conservative Party to fight decisions like this that, you know, on the surface look like they might be aimed to streamline the process, but are really just injecting more bureaucracy into this National Energy Board process of approving pipelines and whatnot, that at the end of the day, there needs to be someone who stands up for the Western interests of energy, because that drives the economy, and it drove the economy for the, you know, first decade and a half of the 2000s here in Canada.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note as well that Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, tried to mess with the national energy and create his own program.
Yeah, that didn't go down well here, did it?
No, I think the Liberals were shut out of Alberta for quite a while after that, and they were definitely not not doing very well in most of the western provinces up until this last
Well, yeah,
election.
they had not won a seat in Calgary since the 1960s up until this election, and that's right around the time that Elder Trudeau came into power. So,
Hmm.
all I can say is we'll be ready here, and it's definitely something that comes with the Trudeau name.
Yep, and I think the Conservative Party is much better placed to combat this sort of thing than the, disconnected PCs and the Canadian Alliance, and how they were all split up into different parties, and the PCs under Joe Clark weren't able to really combat Trudeau very much either. Whereas I think nowadays the Conservatives are probably better placed to be able to combat this type of change.
Right. And I mean, when it comes to all sorts of things, I mean, you have, for example, on the NDP side, the NDP as a federal provincial party entity, as we talked about, being one entity across Canada, endorsing things such as the LEAP Manifesto, which, for its contents, may very well be called the Communist Manifesto in a modern light, because it, advocates for a total withdrawal from the carbon economy and whatnot. So you got the NDP on that side, you got the Liberals doing this, and the only free enterprise alternative is going to be the Conservative Party. So if the NDP is doing LEAP and the Liberals are doing this, I mean, it's pretty obvious which way Western Canada will go. And I think anytime a Liberal government, can get 4 cabinet seats out of Alberta, that's something that they should be proud of. So they've got to be careful with what they're doing.
I think all this just points to the fact that the 2019 election is going to look very different from the 2015 one.
And very different than the 2011 election, too. So.
Indeed.
And that's about 2 years away, so we got to start thinking about that.
Indeed.
All right, so I believe you have a word of the week that kind of ties everything together.
Yeah, so the word of the week this week is going to be energy. So it is described by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as usable power such as heat or electricity, but also the resources for producing such power. So I think in many different senses we could define power as well, but in this case I think it means things like to heat your homes or to power your lights.
Anything that powers the modern world.
Exactly. And I think we all know that power is able to power the modern world. And I think power in a different sense could definitely mean things like political power and the different energies used there.
Right. And I mean, energy is also as a whole about what the Canadian economy has been defined for, since around 2003 up until the recent collapse in oil prices. And it'll be back at some point. It's just a matter of what it's going to look like. But it makes sense that Canada is a energy and resource-based economy just because of the vast land that we have. And, we don't have the infrastructure to produce like the Chinese or the manufacturing capabilities that the U.S. once did, but we certainly have natural resources and energy here in Canada.
Indeed.
All right, well, that does it for this episode of The Right Side. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Reminder, full show notes are available at rightsidenews.ca. We're also on Twitter and Facebook at rightsideca if you want to have a look there, get in contact with us, engage us, and we will see you all next week. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
We'll see you in a while.